Hello, this is Kim Murden and this is the Good Herbwife podcast. These podcasts really have arisen out of my patience and conversations with friends and family to look at things from different perspectives really, and people encouraging me to say, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. So today I'm going to offer you up a story, and I just want to put it in to the wheel of the year. I'm actually recording this bit of the introduction out in some ancient woodland, walking the dog in the morning, and the autumn is turning, and I'm always enjoyed the thresholds where the season changes. I think it gives us glimpses and views into different perspectives, and how actually the energies, the life forces of the wheel of life are absolutely continuous and supportive of each other. I'm recording this in 2020 in the time of COVID and the human response, and I really want to tease out the things that are not being spoken about, that's kind of elephant in the room. Although we've mentioned endlessly in our news media globally death, we actually haven't addressed the place of the forces of life, the forces that are involved in dying, and our relationship between life and death. And absolutely, sitting in the woods at this moment in time is a good place to understand that in a very gentle way. As I sit, the golden leaves of the hornbeam and the oak, they're coming to the ground, and they're going to decay over the years into the earth that then is going to feed all the trees that grow up and stand, having grown from the tiny seeds that have fallen into the clay soil that's all around. And if we look closely at any trees at this point in time, as the sap declines down the trunk and exposes all the twigs and branches, if it's a deciduous tree, we'll actually see the little buds for next spring's leaves, next spring's fruiting bodies, whether they're male or female flowers. So a very gradual, harmonious, continuous dance between what gives life and what takes life away, and a joy really can be found in that. And I don't mean in some weird way. I mean in a contentment, an equanimity, if we sit with that, a calmness, especially in times of a lot of human noise and fret. So there's a couple of sayings which I don't know if I can quite remember them correctly, but they go along the lines that if we try to conquer death, we lay desolation upon the earth. And if any manifestation of desire and aggression are usually entangled with a avoidance of life. So we'll just let those sort of sit there. Oh, and here's a deer coming, walking through. She might have seen us. I wonder how many there are. If we keep our predatory eyes down, she might walk past. Now what a gift is that if you sit quietly. Sit quietly. Well, that was a gift. I haven't been that close to a deer for a long time. Reminded me when I used to walk to school through the park, old bit of woodland, and sometimes the wild deer would run past, coming into a clearing and then running back into the trees. And that was just one solitary deer. It could see me and the dog, but I was sitting quietly, so I just turned the microphone off. I just observed it as it moved through the low branches and the trees, and it's gently gone off. So always a pleasure to be that close to wildness and not encroach on its activities. So coming back to what these podcasts want to offer up is a way of putting some wondering and pondering, and I want to direct them really as if we're having a conversation then it's a conversation that you can then take on out into your own, internal landscape and within your family and friends too. Because I'm a great adherent to the fact that we do have access daily to lots of common knowledge, common wisdoms, and the busyness of social media and all these other competing sort of political agendas, marketing agendas, blunt that or make us doubt it. But actually we need to celebrate the ebbs and flows of day-to-day human life and of being parents, of being mothers, of being fathers, of raising children, of being siblings, of enabling children to grow up well, and taking care of the times when the end of the years are coming. And these take commitment and hard work, and it's not about glory and it's not about proclaiming things. It's just really actions speak louder than words. It's about relationship. So I'm going to offer up it, and it's kind of absolutely pertinent for these times in terms of, as I say, the psychosis around us trying to control, the notional idea that we can control a virus, and the idea that we can shut out the reality of dying. And it's not to say we shouldn't take care and be diligent about all those things. Those are the bigger political stories. But we have come a long way from those of us who don't live very close to the natural cycles, have come a long way from understanding that and maybe become fearful, over fearful. And so here's the story. It's called Lady Death. Is this one of the stories much needed for our times that needs sharing? It is probably one that the oldest of old loves to hear, if it has due regard for the natural ways, with a nod to the humming song that accompanies the endless stirring and alchemy in the cauldron of life, that ever unceasing work. Perhaps the old woman in her work allows herself a smile when she hears such a tale well told, that is free of the imprisonment of words set down in black and white by those who want to control the narrative and the thoughts of others. The story starts in the days when village life was changing imperceptibly, becoming organised so that the metal chink of coins was more readily the way of exchange and ownership of things. The seasons still turned, the crops grew, the fields harvested, the winter dark came with the stories and the weaving around the fire, and then spring re-emerged with the ploughing, the sowing and growing. There was a day when my mother needed to go and tend the milk cow, who had too much heat in her udders. Taking up her basket of herbs and balms, she turned to me as I was finishing the kneading of the bread. "While I'm attending to our gentle milk beast, please go and sit and stay beside your grandmother." A stone fell to the pit of my stomach. What was I supposed to do with grandmother, who was lying with her face turned to the wall? Sensing my unease, mother added, "There is nothing to fear you. All you have to do is sit beside her, so she knows someone is there. No harm will come to you. Please sit by her side. She has always loved you." So I moved towards where grandmother lay, all bones protruding like gnarled tree limbs under the blanket, which moved like a leaf in a gentle May breeze as her shallow breathing became the major activity of her day. There was a pause in her breath. And then slowly she turned her head towards me. Please don't let her speak or smile. All had become a living grimness of teeth and skull. Did she sense my horror? She moved her hand and motioned me move closer. Those hands that had always been so strong I had long watched them as she taught me to milk the cow, tend the honey skeps, plant the beans and weave at the loom. But now they had taken on some strange, otherworldly luminescence. Ah, child, you see it, don't you? Yet there is nothing to fear you here. My mind was dizzy. What was I supposed to do? What was I supposed to say to this elder of the household, who was now as frail as a sparrow? I have a story to tell you. It might help what you see and what you will encounter throughout life. Listen close, though, as my energies are being drawn elsewhere. As I came closer, she took my hand in a grip that was surprisingly warm and strong, determined, I'd say, as iron, and it must be from that she found the strength to tell me this tale. Your great-grandmother, my mother, oh, you so remind me of her, was born in the days when women and men understood all the ways of the trees, the beasts, and the land, and the work of their living days her little chink of coin. She taught me all I needed to know in the tending of life, within the family, the farm, and the land throughout all the seasons. She showed me how to give gratitudes to all that gave us life. But there were new lords in the land who started to tell the villagers there was only one God, and dues had to be paid to him in church. Still, your grandparents lived here in this house, where we all do now, raising their family, tending quietly to the old ways, yet making sure we were observed following the new ways. And I know your mother whispers stories to you about my only brother, the lost one. You need to know his story. On the day he was born, we were already 12 sisters strong. The new church had decreed every child must have a godparent to guide them through life. Having called upon many already among our village circle, your great-grandfather, my father, took it into his head to seek people beyond our lands. Setting out along the track, heading east, the first person he met was neat, clean-shaven, smartly dressed in plain but expensive cloth with gold stitching. The man, though unknown to my father, greeted him. I know who you are looking for. Is a new godparent for your son. I offer to be at his christening and be a guide as he learns his place in this village. My father was never one to take things at face value and asked the stranger as to who he was. I am God. Who better for your child? I am gratified by your offer, sir, but I do not think this is best for my child. In your kingdom the rich have it all on earth and in heaven, but the poor starve in life with meagre promise of something better after death. And with that he thanked God and boldly continued on his way. As the birds sang in the hedges, my father noticed coming towards him an elegantly dressed man in a brightly embroidered cloak. Greetings, my dear man. I know whom you seek, and the wisdom you have shown in turning down God. I'm the guardian your son needs. I will give him a rich life full of money and easy pleasures. Now, my father was not outwitted by such charming and smooth talk. He'd spotted the shiny hoof poking out beneath that gorgeous cloak. Ah, sir, you'd be the devil, then. Your ways are definitely not for my son. All you offer is debased and delusional, and you cheat us all, so thanks, but no thanks. And with that he walked further along, wondering if there were any ordinary folks beyond our village. As he was walking past the grand elm trees, he noticed on the horizon a woman dressed in a linen gown. Once it would have been a fine shade of blue, but now blackened with the work of ages. As she neared him, she lifted her clear blue eyes to his and offered to be the child's spiritual guardian. "And you would be?" he asked. "Death," she simply answered. "And if you permit your son to be under my care, I will not fail him. His life will be fulsome, and he will be known through many lands. He will thrive in the work I have to share with him. All I ask is that when he reaches 13 years, he comes to live with me, and I will teach him all he needs to know." "Lady Death, you do treat us, whether rich or poor, the same. None can avoid meeting you. So thank you. I feel and I consider this to be an honest and fair choice of godparent for my son." The agreement was struck, and so it was in the newly built church. My little brother's christening was attended by the lady. He did not meet her again until, as agreed, at 13 years of age, we all bid him travel well as he set off like any other eager apprentice to his new life. Lady Death greeted him. "You will now become a great doctor if you are prepared to learn all I am going to show you about the ways of the herbs. You will be able to grow into a man of great renown, and your reputation will spread across many lands for the care you will bring to the sick and the dying. But there is one condition you must promise always to keep. If, when you enter the sick chamber, I am standing at the head of the bed, the person is in there dying, and you must honestly attend to them with a special mix of herbs. And if I am at the foot of the bed, you will know that they will continue to live with the care of the right herbs, all of which I shall teach you about." The young lad agreed, and indeed grew into a man who was respected for the skills and care he brought to all that called him to their sick bed. His reputation did spread far and wide, and so it was that one day the king's messengers rode fast to him with a command from the monarch for his assistance at his bedside, as he was seriously ill. On arriving in the king's chamber, where many university physicians were in attendance, he saw Death at the king's head. The king hoarsely implored the young doctor for help, the other fools being of no use. "If you make me well, so I can rule once more, I will give you half the gold that sits over there in that chest." And they both turned their gaze to a fine carved wooden chest, and the young doctor felt a seduction come over him at the thought of the weight of a very full purse. As quick as a flash, he lifted the king's bed and turned head to foot and administered medicines that gave the king a fresh lease of life. On leaving the chamber, Lady Death came fast along beside him. "You must never do that again. Never. You are still young, so I forgive you this once for such audacity. But promise, never again will you transgress our agreement. Never." He agreed readily to the veracity of her request. A few days later, once more he was called by the king's messengers. This time the king's daughter had fallen gravely ill. On entering the princess's chamber, the young doctor saw once more Death at the head of the bed. The king was despairing. "You must save my daughter. If you keep her alive, not only do I promise you more gold, but lands in my kingdoms, and I will allow you to seek her hand in marriage." Gazing down on the young woman, even in her state of high fever, his heart tumbled for her beauty and vulnerability. Enchanted with promise and following his heart's passion, he once more turned the bed with extraordinary speed. He then went on to give the young woman remedies that enabled her to live on. On leaving the chamber, Lady Death took the young doctor by the elbow and walked him fast out of the castle, and in tense silence they went back to the lands of his training. They entered the woods, and she walked him towards a cave entrance he had not noticed before, and in they went. Once through the cool, dark mouth, they entered a twisting, turning passage where on every ledge and free surface candles flickered. He was awestruck as they wove through passages and into ever-expanding chambers with candles glowing everywhere. "What is this place?" he eventually managed to ask. "This," she said, letting go of him and opening her arms out around her as if in a vast embrace, "is my place of work. Here I tend to the souls of all." The young doctor looked quizzical. Continuing, she said, "Every candle represents the life of someone alive. Here I care for them all and will go to them in their time of need." Looking around him in amazement, the young doctor took it all in. Beside him large candles, tall, fat and bright, and others dwindling down to their final guttering. In fact, all around him was every sort of candle, tall, short, thin, wide, some burning fast, some hesitant and smoky, and others consuming themselves as fast as if they were in a draught. "Oh, this is stunning. I would love to see my candle." Lady Death looked at him directly, and he couldn't quite read her expression. "Would you? Are you sure?" she queried. "Of course, for mine must be tall and burning bright. You said my reputation would be great, and now I have money, land, and a beautiful woman to marry. All is ahead of me. Go on, please. Please take me to mine." Lady Death, with reluctance in her feet, led him to his candle. There before, in a nook, sat his candle, low and with a weak flame, not far from the moment of guttering out. The young doctor's face paled. This can't be right. This is not my candle. I've gone up in the world by saving the king and his daughter. Is this some trick you are playing on me? I am a young man, and have much to do. My candle should be tall." "You still don't understand what is around us, do you? These candles represent everyone's living. Just because a candle is tall and vital does not mean it is a young person's. You see that one over there?" He turned his eyes to a tall one shining steady. "That belongs to a woman in her 80s, while look at the one beside hers. That is a baby's." "It can't be," he gasped. "It's very short and flickering. It's about to go out." With tenderness, Lady Death explained. "It is the great-granddaughter recently born to that old woman. The poor thing has only a few hours to live. What a sorrow for them all." By now the doctor's face was ashen as he understood the depth of what he saw around him and the scale of Lady Death's care. Yet he started to plead with her. "Don't let my candle go out. No, not now. It's not my time. I have so much more to do with my life." And on he went. And while she tried to explain that was not in her powers, not in the nature of her work, yet her heartstrings were pulled by the deep love for her godchild, the boy she had thought had truly taken on board all she had taught. With panic in his eyes, Please light a new candle for me." "I can't do that. I can only light a new one when another has burnt itself out." But he came back. "Set a new candle top mine now. The candles, my life, will then continue all as one." She turned aside to gather a new candle. His torment was her torment too. He was relieved, thinking she was going to agree to his plan. Instead, she quickly placed the new candle on top of the guttering flame of his candle. He fell down then and there, and the smoke of his candle drifted and curled into the air, while on she had to go, forever taking care of all that was in her vast cavern. My grandmother finished the story, slowly releasing my hand with a sigh. I'm going to let that story just percolate through us and leave it sitting wherever it needs to sit with us in our own immediate time of being, and maybe at other times when we come to think about it. There are obviously moments when we can deeply analyse stories, but as I say, I'm not going to do that today. I just want to round up by noting that stories can be great medicine at times. And how do we know what's the right story, what's the right moment to tell it, and who needs to receive it? Well, we don't always know, but I want to give you a very personal example when I did use a version of this story for one of my children. And it was at a time where I had been immersing myself in storytelling. It was a story that obviously I knew about, and my child had quite a lot of stories from the Grimm's tales in his childhood. And it was at a time when my children were just about to turn 10 and 12. And their dad, my husband, was very seriously ill with cancer, and we'd been talking to them throughout this time about dad not being well and finding things difficult and having those age appropriate conversations. And there came a moment when we were still living in the southern hemisphere in New Zealand, and my husband had flown back early to the UK ahead of us and had faced some life-saving emergency operation. And I'm reminded of it's a very bittersweet memory, really, that he had come out of the surgery and wanted to have some connection with us, his family, and my noble young nephews had managed to set up some complicated, challenged all the Wi-Fi systems of the hospital and this and that, and managed to set up a Skype conversation. And there my husband sat in the chair on the other side of the planet, coming over the the internet, and had a very delightful, connective conversation with the children. It was absolutely a painfully bittersweet moment for me, as I can remember to this day him sitting upright and solid and proud between those two nephews, talking to us, and I, as his wife, could see very clearly, and as a healer I could see very clearly that something very dramatic had shifted. And it was in one of those moments, actually, I saw very, very straightforwardly that luminescence of people's hands when they are entering their unthreading from life forces, how their hands become strangely larger and luminescence. It's not necessarily a overt thing, maybe it's more of a subtle thing that some of you will also have noticed in life. Anyway, that little session passed, and a few days later I was pondering, because I know that my son, in his way, in his that childhood magical way, I think had heard his father's promise that he would live through everything and survive, and I could see that was not going to be the case. And I needed to give him a message, give him some information that wasn't, to give people very blunt, straightforward information, or especially as children. And there are times in our adult life as well where it's too much. So that's where the stories, and indeed even our own dreams, can come to our rescue to help us process and digest and deal with really quite momentous events in our life. So I think we were just sitting after school one day and we were just talking about different stories, and I just pondered. I said, well, do you know this one about Godfather Death? And I told him a very short version of it, shorter than the one I told you today. And at the end, he, in that way that children have, he went, I see why you told me that story. And then he went and pottered off and got on with what else he wanted to be playing with. And that, that was good enough. That started an internal process for him, I'm sure. So there you go, the alchemy of stories. They always have a place, and it's something I will return to, the richness that's in them and the things that we can pull out that we don't quite know that's what actually the thing that we needed from a story at that moment in time. And actually there was one story that my husband really loved to hear, and he gave him lots of imagery whilst he was going through like his chemotherapy. And actually it was the last story I told him in the last few weeks of his life, and he had very limited energy at that time, and I could only tell it in little 5-minute sections, because I think it was about a 20-25 minute story. And what was so fascinating as well, not only the nourishment that he still gained from that, but even when I, in my discombobulation at moments, might have forgotten one part of it, he, out of his weary, drugged haze, would come back and offer up quite clearly the sentence that I had forgotten. So finally, actually, I just want to return to one of those sayings I gave you in the introduction. I realised I had got that a bit topsy-turvy, and that never does it? So I'd said, right, what the saying is desire and aggression are both forms of resistance to death. Desire and aggression are both forms of resistance to death, and I think I'd mentioned life. There you go. They are interwoven, but to get the sense of why I feel that's important. And the other statement, that the victory of life over death leads to the desolation of the earth, is that we are in a very busy modern world, a very consuming world of material goods and opinions and distractions. I think we've got seduced into believing that the narrative that our lives are linear and that there's a finality, there's an end point with death, and death is seen, I think, really in a lot of circumstances as a failure. And I would suggest, from my perspective with my feet on the ground, that actually it's a lot more circular than that, and that very much brings us back to where we are now, where I am now in October, as the summer season is absolutely diminishing. The leaves are falling from the trees, the vegetables have been harvested, and everything's descending in and down onto the earth into that dreaming state of winter, as I see it, that rest phase and that decay phase that is then going to enable vitality to rise up when the spring warmth comes, and for the seeds that have fallen this autumn to find their birth in the spring sunlight. So that very circular notion of life and death and rebirth is quite a central ethos for me, and something that we'll come back to a lot as a theme, I think, as we go through these podcasts. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you'll join me again, and goodbye.